Explained by the Billy Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more, compiled by David Chance, revised July 2, 2025.
Future Earth Humans Part 2. See also Gilgamesh. See also Hyperborea, Hyperboreans. See also Ica Stones. See also Longskulls. See also Men in Black. See also Nazca Lines. See also Nokodemion. See also Ptah. See also Quetzalcoatl. See also Rods. See also Starchild Skull. See also Teos Caves Metal Library. See also Tunguska Event 1908. See also UFOs Flying Saucers.
Contact Report 7.
My next question deals with the earthly human races. We have here yellow, red, white, brown, and black human beings. How does that come? Why is there this color differentiation?
This actually belongs in the history of Earth humanity, which I wanted to continue to tell you. But further, I wanted to say that some differently colored races already became extinct a long time ago. But in the same way they are all the product of the celestial suns, that is to say, they were begotten of them, just like the Earth races still existing today. The celestial suns, or starfarers, as we want to call our forebears, were at home on many different planets of stars, in a different space-time configuration or far away from the SOL system, whereby the planets were fundamentally different in climatic terms. Hence, they also produced other races which were able to adapt to the climate from the beginning. Due to the climate conditions, also a corresponding skin color developed, of which there are innumerable in the universe. Their body sizes were also different because, depending on the gravity of the planet in question, they ranged from only 50 centimeters tall up to several meters. There were and are even beings, which you call gigantic ones, giants or titans, and such beings too once endued the earth with life. They too produced offspring here, but they were gradually exterminated because they were usually very malicious and exercised tyranny. The different color races of today are thus descendants of our variously colored forebears, who came from different planets of foreign stars. Well, you are right with your view that the human beings of the earth are not descendants of the apes. They were partially begotten by our forebears, who also mixed themselves with earth beings, who were simply called Eves at that time. But the earth beings at that time were of the most diverse forms and kinds. Some of them were completely wild creatures of human-like forms, some of which had been marooned on the earth in earlier millennia by our forebears, that is, their descendants. These descendants of the marooned were abused by foreign spacefarers. The Eves were, besides Earth-created hominid living creatures, nothing more than very wild descendants of those marooned thousands of years ago, from whom at that time any tools were taken away. But since our forebears were mixed races of different colors and sizes, they of course also produced different colors and races of different sizes, completely according to their characteristics. The smallest ones were 50 centimeters tall, while the largest and most vicious ones reached some 12 meters. Their appearance was also varying, and some type of them were only remotely reminiscent to human forms. They were left to die out or were killed if they were too vicious. In many cases, they hid themselves in far remote areas and survived for thousands of years, as their average age was about 1,500 years. But little by little, they also became victims of the time, or of the human beings. The last of the vicious ones, whose life was ended with Gewaltsamkeit, died a little more than 230,000 years ago. Today, according to our knowledge, only 7 such beings of the old human life forms still live on the earth, where they remain so well hidden that they will certainly never be found and will one day die a peaceful death, and that without descendants, because they have become too old and passive for propagation.
So far, you have never told me where you actually always stay, when you are not carrying on conversations with me.
We have our bases on the Earth, as well as on many other planets, where we stay continuously. We also have such a base in this country, Switzerland. It is located high up in the mountains, near there I have my main whereabouts when I am on the Earth. However, we also have some other important stations that are distributed all over the world. But they are all built so securely that it would be impossible to find them if one does not know them exactly. Moreover, I am very often on the move and have to fulfill my tasks on a wide variety of worlds. I also often go to visit my home, as you tend to say, and so I also often spend time on the Pleiades, as we call them for the time being.
Contact Report 8.
Just ask, but be conscious of the fact that I am not allowed to reveal any secrets that would still be detrimental to the development of the consciousness of the human being of Earth.
You mean the Aquarian Age?
Sure, that's the era I'm talking about. It will bring developmental change events for the human beings of Earth. Very good ones, but also very bad ones. Particularly grave are in this regard the religious influences, because this intellectual, spiritual consciousness-based era brings forth very many new and evil types of religions and sects, wherethrough the human being is supposed to be even more struck in their delusion, whereby also sectarian mass suicides and murders are to be feared. But we want to try to prevent this, because otherwise the same thing will happen that happened to our ancestors, namely that the sect rulers and scientists will, as time goes by, also elevate themselves to ishwishs and bring about the same catastrophe over creatures and solar systems as it was also characteristic of our forebears and many other races.
But now once again a question regarding the age. How is this then with you?
The laws are of equal value throughout the universe. When we have a higher life expectancy than the human being of Earth, then this is conditioned by life. But at the same time, research and evolution also play a role that is not insignificant. But we do not want, and also are not allowed to exercise any coercion to convince the Earth humans of the truth.
Contact Report 9.
Already for decades, various human beings of Earth and entire groups have been pressing us partly consciously, partly unconsciously, into spheres into which we do not fit in any form, spheres in which we do not want to be at home either. Often only for the sake of the desire to show off, and for the sake of pure profit are we ranked higher than we are in reality. But we are all only human beings, like all human creatures. According to your terms, we may well live in a state of superior technology and of great spiritual and consciousness-based progress, but not in a boastfulness and overwhelmingness, which the majority of the human beings on Earth impute to us. We are neither the guardians of the Earth humans, nor any God-sent angels or the like. Various ego-addicted persons and groups led into the unreal by them claim that we were the guardians of the Earth and its human beings, and that we would direct their destinies. However, this does not correspond to the truth, because we are only carrying out a self-obligated task, which in no way has anything to do with a surveillance and a directing of the actual destinies of the Earth humans. It is therefore wrong to portray us as over-earthly ambassadors and guardians. If we were ambassadors and guardians in the sense as it is claimed about us, then we would land out in plain view and direct the destinies of the human beings of Earth in full recognizability. We are not what is imputed on us, even though we are spiritually and consciousness-based, about 25 million years farther progressed, and technically almost 3.5 millennia ahead of the Earth humans. But it is in the sense of all those Earth humans who are themselves caught in a religious belief to make us become something godly. Noti. The following excerpts explain how some ancient Pleiadian ancestors found their way to Earth. See also Contact Report 5:S 67-193, Contact Report 70:S 23-181, and Contact Report 121:B79-90. At our fifth contact, I finished the history of humankind at the time when 50,000 years ago, according to earthly calendar, our homeworlds found freedom and peace. Before that time, 70,000 human beings fled under the leadership of the scientist Pelagon. With spaceships, which they had seized, they fled through the space out of another configuration of space and time into the one of the Milky Way of the Dern universe and settled on the Earth. Under Pelagon's leadership, there were 200 sub-leaders, scientists who were each responsible for a specific field of knowledge. Pelagon was unanimously recognized and respected by them and all others as King of Essence of Wisdom, Ishwish/God. In the course of the millennia, they built large cities and inhabited all continents of the Earth. Unfortunately, this only went well for barely 10,000 years before lust for might regained the upper hand and a deadly war raged over the world. Everything without residue was destroyed, and only a few thousand human beings were able to survive, while others fled again into the outer space and into the old space-time configuration and settled on distant worlds. For the next 7,000 years, the Earth was no longer flown to, during which time those who stayed behind became completely wild and degenerated. After that, the descendants of those who had settled on distant worlds returned. Again, they were led by an Ishwish. Under such a kind of Ishwish command, the distant descendants later built Atlantis and Mu, two huge cities on two different continents. For thousands of years, they lived in complete friendship and in peace, until some scientists again succumbed to the greed for might and wanted to seize the rule. However, having become tired of the constant wars, the peoples rose against them. Hence, they seized spacecrafts and fled into the outer space, according to earthly calendar, about 15,000 years ago. For 2 millennia, they and their descendants lived in a neighboring solar system. 2 millennia during which they had become very evil and were only able to uphold a certain regulation under the strictest discipline. Through mutations and researches, they achieved a very long lifespan, which amounted to more than 3,000 years. Obsessed with imperiousness, they left their world about 13,500 Earth years ago and came back to the Earth. Their supreme leader was the scientist Eris, who was also called the Barbarian. As already Ishwish Pelagon nearly 190,000 years ago, he also had 200 leaders, or sub-leaders, who were each responsible for a specific field of knowledge. They settled in 2 parts in the far north and in today's America, Florida, whereby they constantly forged ahead to Atlantis and Mu in order to invade them with war. And only a few millennia after their renewed requisitioning of the Earth, they succeeded in completely destroying Mu and Atlantis. Few survivors went into servitude, while great scientists were able to flee and return to the original homeworlds in the Pleiades. But thousands of years before that point in time, the new intruders spread across the Earth, and Ishwish Arius ruled with a firm and bloody hand. But also his sub-leaders usurped all kinds of things and made themselves more and more independent. Within only 3 decades, They acted largely at their own discretion, even though they feared the punishments of the Ishwish-Aerus. They pushed very far away from them the codex of preserving their own race pure under all circumstances and not allowing it to fall prey to mutations. Forbidden and secretly, they went out and captured Earth-created life forms, but so also turned wild or mutated beings, which were very distant descendants of former human beings from the outer space. The female creatures, beautiful in their wildness, were tamed and copulated with, or fertilized with, genetical manipulation by the leaders who called themselves celestial sons. Case by case, depending on their own races, they thus created mutated creatures, completely new life forms that were of dwarfish stature, very gigantic or similar to animal forms. Semjase, the supreme leader of all subleaders, copulated with an EVA, a female creature who, according to his understanding, was still preserved as the most human-like and also quite beautiful one. The descendant of this act was of male gender and a human being in good form. Semjase called him Adam, which is tantamount to human being of Earth. Another copulation of the same kind brought forth a female creature, and in later years, Semjase determined that these two Adams had to mate together. In the meantime, however, many other creatures of the same kind were conceived, who banded together into large groups and tribes. From them, today's humankind developed, which was already at its beginning according to its races distributed to the most different continents. Ishwish-Aerus was very infuriated by this action, and where he could get hold of the fallible ones, he ordered his incorrectly acting subleaders to be captured and killed or banished. In the course of time, however, he changed his mentality, and he recognized a new might that he could exercise over the newly created human beings of Earth. Through newly appointed guardian angels and subleaders, he cast a spell over 3 humankinds. These were the forebears of those whom you now call Indians, then the inhabitants who had settled around the Black Sea, and thirdly, those who roamed in the south below the Mediterranean Sea as gypsies, and were therefore called Hyperboreans. Through his guardian angels, Ishwish-Aerus, let these humankinds be subjugated and a spell be cast on them. As supreme ruler over them, he let himself be worshipped and prayed to by them. In his megalomania, he let himself in relation to them be celebrated as creator and creation, and his subleaders as creational helpers. He enacted harsh and strict laws, which without exception demanded the blood of a culprit. His son, Jehav, who took over his reign after 3,400 years, was only very little better, for he too, as proclaimed Ishwish, demanded nothing but blood and death among the 3 enslaved humankinds. It was only the later descendants of the gods who became more humane and developed in the sense of the spiritual evolution. When this was finally the case, they decided, in accordance with their change of mentality and consciousness, to leave the development of the Earth humans to their natural courses and to withdraw themselves to their original home. So the last of them left the Earth 1,943 years ago and returned as peaceful creatures to our Pleiades, where their own humankind had in the meantime become very highly developed. Today they live united as particularly long-lived with the normally aging, who on average reach 1,000 years of age, and so today we are one single people in peace and freedom.
Contact Report 12.
Not just you alone make mistakes. They also happen to us here and there.
I'm about to start crying, damn it again.
I really feel like it too. Sadly, not everything can be predetermined, because we all have to make mistakes in order to learn.
Contact Report 14.
We are also subject to mistakes, which I have already mentioned. I want to fix some of the mistakes I have been making. I just do not want to make a mistake twice.
Contact Report 15.
As a result, I have to admit that I succumbed to some errors that brought me to wrong conclusions. You, however, with your feelings, have drawn the right conclusions and laid the perspectives correctly. Obviously, you are superior to me in such things, because you are able to start from purely earthly aspects. However, I do not want to exclude that you can arrive at wrong decisions through this form, just as I did with mine. In the end, we are human beings, albeit from different worlds and from different consciousness-based and spiritual stages, but still fundamentally similar forms of life who have to go the way of their evolution. So this does not exclude that I also make errors, which I ask your friends and acquaintances to understand. My life form is indeed higher developed in all things of the physical and swinging wave-based manner than your people's. But yet we are also not standing at the degree of that absolute full development, which would exclude errors. This one should always consider. We are really not those Vsin of absolute full development, as they are so gladly exploited by pseudo-contact persons for religious benefit, because these supposed Vsin of absolute full development are either cheating and power-grabbing creatures who want to bring the human beings of Earth under their harsh rule, which actually happens in a few cases, or they are quite simply pseudo-Wesen, who exist only in the imagination of the pseudo-contact persons. As my life form is just as imperfect as yours, it must be absolutely understood that I am also subject to errors. Nevertheless, if I slip up in such things, then I name them openly and stand by them, for it would make no sense and be of no benefit if I were to cover them up or deny them. This would only redound to my own disadvantage. But now, once again, is the time for us to say goodbye, but I will call you again myself in a short time, for there are still other important things to make clear.
But then call me directly to China or Chihuahua, for those places are more along the way than this place here in the middle of nowhere, where I had to take my moped for miles.
Can it also be the South Pole or the North Pole? Note: sarcasm.
Contact Report 16.
But I would also like to give him, Hans Jacob, the feeling of my gratitude, because he acknowledges that also our way of life needs further development, and we therefore make mistakes, which he accepts in the form that he does not become reproachful. In other words, and in other sense, that he excuses my actions, which were faulty.
Contact Report 17.
Not for nothing did I direct the steps towards eliminating plant life forms. Such things are subject to certain laws of our race that allow such eliminations only in emergencies.
Oh, so you got a fish, huh?
That seems to be your modern language again?
Right. And it means you laughed at a man and wants to get married?
No, I feel much better without a man, at least now. I may have something planned for later.
The dear Earthlings make their stupid jokes about Moon and Mars and other space people. They draw them as scale-reinforced monsters with fixed skull antennas, feelers, 5 breasts, and many other idiocies. They call these things humor. Do not you read newspapers and magazines, etc.?
Sure, because I move here and there among the terrestrial human beings, shielded from the earthly human vibrations, and get hold of something readable from time to time, but I have never found such things in it.
If of course you only read Mickey Mouse, Fix and Foxy, and Superman booklets, then you might not be in the right place.
I actually know them, and I think they're funny. However, other readables are mostly only newspapers, etc.
Contact Report 20.
We do not want to create a global truth organization or in a short time flood your world inhabitants with the truth, because such an enterprise would not be useful for our cause. Only small groups are useful when their members are fully and totally truthful. Through them, the truth will slowly be spread and will encompass humanity over generations and centuries.
Contact Report 21.
On the other hand, I approached you several times with a suggestion to get you crystals which you could sell.
And what if checks reveal any radiation that is not of earthly origin?
Our technology enables the extraction of such radiations from all material forms if they do not contain changeable life. Thus, I have also removed all radiation phenomena in the minerals and crystals given to you, so that when they were introduced into earthly space, they constitutionally absorbed the radiation inherent in the Earth in a few moments, so that no difference can be discerned in comparison with similar earthly crystals and minerals.
How can you free them from their radiation? What is the process and how does it all work?
Our apparatuses extract the radiation from the things and release it converted into good form again, so that it can be absorbed again by the planets concerned. The whole process is a regeneration process of natural order. The apparatus could therefore be called a neutralizer according to your terms.
Contact Report 22.
But can you explain to me once why your mental transmissions always appear so stereotypical in me at a later point in time, and that there are no repetitions of any words or sentences? These later transmissions of our conversations are so completely different than when we are in intellectual exchange with each other. I often have a lot of trouble writing your reports because you just keep dictating and never repeat a word. Your report submissions come into my consciousness just as we did the conversation. This often leads to the fact that I have to omit words or entire phrases when writing, in order to be able to follow dictation in writing at all. This is not always the case, but it is often the case that I write wrong words. Sometimes in your transmissions, it seems to me as if your thoughts are a mechanical sequence, as if they were coming out of a machine. I always have to think of a tape that reproduces exactly what it has recorded. Therefore, I have come to the conclusion that you do not carry out your transmissions personally, but have them transmitted by a machine or something similar. The reason for this could be that you suffer from the same evil as we human beings on Earth, namely that you also cannot remember word for word what has been spoken between us or elsewhere. But since the subconscious potencies never forget anything, and you can tap into them with certainty, you will do this with a machine or something, which then radiates everything to me. These are my basic considerations. Of course, I can be wrong in all things, but the degree of probability of these considerations seems to me to be the greatest. These considerations would also be compatible with the fact that not a single word is repeated in your transmissions, and that I therefore often have great difficulty in writing down the sentences and words, coming in at normal speaking speed, quickly enough. So I thought about the inner workings of the machine, and came across the fact that it is only necessary to have a censorship-free.
Wait, you cannot explain that, at least not to the humans of your world. I will therefore have to consult with the others and judge everything with them. But I suppose that our High Council will have to make its decision on this, because if we have to eliminate certain things completely, then we have.
Wait, Semjase, are you saying that you want to extinguish something in me?
You would not feel anything and would not be affected in any way later in life. It is only a matter of removing the knowledge about a certain system of elements that you have become aware of through your reflections, etc. Our possibilities in this respect are so very precise and of absolute security that you would neither be able to do anything about it nor feel the slightest bit.
But I would know that something is simply no longer present in me, yes?
Sure, because it only removes a certain factor, but not your memories.
What's this total damn elimination supposed to be?
It springs from the knowledge of a highly developed science of our breed. The ability and effects of such total eliminations are absolutely certain, and their precision does not allow for the slightest substance of uncertainty or vagueness.
But first I have to know the timetable for a total elimination. How much time would such a total elimination take, from order to completion?
If we put our equipment into operation, which is always on standby for such total eliminations, and adjust it to the life form in question, then this takes less than 3 minutes, whereby the distances play no role whatsoever.
And how much time do you need if I would give the order on mental basis via your person?
I still do not see clearly, but we would need another minute to transmit your error.
Well, that would be less than 4 minutes in total if I understood correctly, yes?
Contact Report 23.
These laws about marriage and coitus, etc., as they were preserved in the Talmud Emmanuel, are of human origin and created for the purpose of giving order to the earthly forms of life, and also to maintain them.
But what about yourselves? Do you also have human legislation?
Where thinking life forms live, such laws and recommendations are given everywhere, depending on the state of the conscious and spiritual development of the human being's leaders. However, these laws have been taken from the natural laws and shaped in a responsible form into human natural laws. So they are laws and recommendations of natural logic, and in no way full of illogical and even dumb primitive, as they are created and applied in your world.
Actually, you have already answered my next question with your answer regarding the existence of your laws, which aims at whether you also know forms of criminality and other degenerations, etc., to which you have to apply laws and recommendations. Laws and recommendations, etc., are only necessary where they must maintain order. But where order has become a matter of course and no degenerations occur, human laws and recommendations are also superfluous. The logical conclusion to be drawn from this is that you, too, are not beyond the state of degenerations, and that consequently, order has not yet become a matter of course. However, I can explain this in such a way that it is connected with the eternal becoming and developing, according to the creative law of becoming and development. As a result of the ongoing creation of new spirits, different levels of age and development of the various levels of the mind appear. Thus, it must logically become a natural process that life forms are also born in your race that are still below your actual normal mental potency, and therefore have to develop further. Since development causes mistakes in every respect, however, these inferior forms of mind or life forms must follow the natural path of development and thus make mistakes. But since mistakes can be disorderly and even fatal, laws and recommendations must be applied in order to maintain this order. That is how I imagine it, because it seems logical to me.
It is absurd how, unfortunately, charlatans always fraudulently claim that we are superhumans and that we no longer need any laws or recommendations. Only where the creative order has become a matter of course do such laws and recommendations fall by. However, this is only the case in very high spiritual spheres. So that means in purely spiritual spheres, where all material things belong to the past. Material forms of life, however, that is to say, material body-dependent forms of all kinds, are still afflicted with too many errors for them to simply ignore a law and commandment adapted to their state.
That is plausible, but how do you then handle this law and commandment with you? If I have understood correctly, have you created a uniform punishment for certain offenses, etc., which is pronounced as a temporary or lifelong banishment?
Sure, you got it right. If the punishment is still applied very primitively everywhere in you, then this is no longer the case with us. Our legislation corresponds to our conscious intellectual level and is therefore truly humane, which cannot be said of your legislation. Serious offenses are no longer punished with us by total elimination and damage of the material body, etc., as this is still barbaric custom and custom with you. Our unity adherence finds its application in a banishment for time or for life. The fallible life forms are banished in this respect to other worlds, which serve exclusively only this purpose. Moreover, only same-sex life forms are banished to such a world. That is to say, only male or only female life forms. This prevents reproduction, and no offspring can be conceived. The exiled are on their own, on their worlds, and have to take care of themselves through their own work. Any mechanical or apparatus aids, etc., are made available to them, but they are deprived of permission to make such aids themselves if they could be used for escape. In order to emphasize this provision, regular checks are carried out on these worlds, and any secretly manufactured products of this kind are eliminated. In addition, any personal physical contact with any other forms of life outside the places of performance will be completely eliminated. On some of our worlds, fallible life forms are banished also on large islands in large seas, if the fallibility rate of the respective worlds is only very small. However, the whole handling and execution is the same as for worlds specially selected for this purpose. This form of punishment ensures the greatest possible security for the order to be observed, and on the other hand, the mistakes are not a burden on the masses. Besides, however, this form of punishment is very humane and expedient, because during the lifelong or temporal exile, the misguided are not inhibited in their development. Besides, crime and the like is practically non-existent in our country.
Could it not be that at very early times our Earth once also served extraterrestrial beings as such a planet of banishment?
Sure, your assumption is correct. In primeval times, variously fallible life forms were banished to your Earth from various worlds in the universe, including our race. But these early times can no longer be grasped by us either, and we have no precise data about them.
But how is it now with you with the so-called marriage? Mate there also male and female as with us?
Or is the procreation of offspring perhaps carried out in a different way than in our country? Are you perhaps breeding your little children in test tubes or in breeding farms?
This is typical human nonsense of earthly origin, a product of pathological imagination. Creation has endowed each individual form of life with very specific values, so that it can reproduce in a very natural way. The law of unity is of equal value in the whole universe, namely that two values of different, and thus female and male, sex, each uniform in itself, together form and result in a large unit or a hyperunit, thus also in the form of the reproduction of any material life forms.
But what about marriage and the procreation of offspring?
Fundamentally, our laws and recommendations in this regard are still partially preserved in many of your ancient writings, for they were transmitted to you by our distant ancestors. With our race, often only marriages of non-monogamous shape are done, after most exact clarification of all facts concerning togetherness. Of course, mistakes in these things cannot be excluded, but they will be eliminated or corrected if necessary. The progeny is determined by the highest rate in the sense that a certain number of births in a certain period must be kept in order to preserve the breed and not cause overpopulation. It is naturally the duty of each individual life form to procreate offspring for the conservation of the species and to exercise control over them. Forms of life that are united in a marriage, that is to say, woman and man, remain classified in this union for the duration of their lives. Divorces, as you know them, are inadequate and allowed only in those blatant cases in which the laws and recommendations of the marriage covenant are grossly violated, with the guilty then falling into banishment. These are, however, occurrences which belong to the absolute rarity with our races. The handling of the laws and recommendations for the individual things of marriage and sexual intercourse, etc., I do not have to mention here specifically, because you can read Talmud Emmanuel from this book. Our laws have been the same for thousands of years and are consistent with Emmanuel's interpretations of the Talmud. A change has only occurred in the form of a tightening, because this was humanized and changed according to our time and our development. The uniform punishment in these things forms the temporal or lifelong banishment.
If I remember correctly, Rashid in the Talmud called these things in chapter 12 about marriage and coitus. So you mean that these laws are still valid today as they were at Emmanuel's time 2,000 years ago, and that you yourselves have adapted the penalty for your races simply to your time and your conscious and spiritual state, in the form that you simply pronounce a lifelong or temporal banishment as a measure of punishment?
Sure, I am sure.
What happens when a person of your race falls in love with a person of another, spiritually and consciously underdeveloped race?
Exactly the same as yourselves. People love each other with all their feelings, just as I love you.
But you have not yet fully answered my question, because in it was also hidden the how, what, and why of a conjugal union or non-union.
If, however, a person of our race falls in love with a race that is different from the rest of the world and is mentally and consciously inferior to us in the sense that the two want to unite, then this possibility will be clarified according to our laws. If the facts show that the necessary conditions of all kinds are fulfilled, the marriage may take place. It really doesn't matter whether the otherworldly way of life lives under our own spiritual and conscious state or not, because in cases of underdevelopment, it is developed by our scientists according to our conscious state.
I think that is very fair, but are such incidents common occurrences?
No, they're actually quite rare.
But now one more question, Semjase. How great in number is your humanity?
I can only answer this question by telling you that we are united in a covenant that extends far into the cosmos. This covenant includes various solar systems and planets in wide space, and the total number of life forms of human norms invigorating them amounts to 127 billion units. But of course, there are countless other intelligent life forms of non-human norms, in addition to humane human forms, which are unknown to us, or with which we are simply not connected.
But can you at least say something about the habitability of our neighboring planets?
I can only explain so much, that different planets were inhabited by our races in earlier times, and are still important as bases for us today in minimal masses. Certainly, there are several different life forms active in your solar system from the vastness of the universe, but they are not located here. Like us, they have their bases, but their breeds live very, very far out in space on their own worlds.
Familiarity sometimes simply awakens feelings that are unreal.
Sure, and we too are subject to these things. It has often seemed to me, according to my feelings, that you are a human being of our race.
Contact Report 24.
Unfortunately, it is often very difficult to find our way in your human beings of the earth, because through the uncontrollability of your feelings, we are often misled and then have to correct ourselves.
Contact Report 25.
With regard to the illogical questions concerning financial aid, etc., I would like to make an explanation for the questioners here, because every human being on Earth should bear in mind, firstly, that we do not have any corresponding things to do with goods and means of payment, etc., as they are customary and common on the Earth. Even if we wanted to, we could not serve you with financial means, which you call money, because we do not have such goods, etc. But when we are here and want to help humanity on the Earth, in its consciousness-based, and other development, then this means a self-imposed obligation that we do not let ourselves be made to do things at the order of the Earth humans. Our task corresponds to a free-willed undertaking.
Contact Report 26.
For a long time, I have suspected that there are other extraterrestrials in our world besides you, but with very different desires and hopes. These beings may be wholly alien to your race, at least some of them, but others must be of your own race. I could imagine that not all extraterrestrials, who are mischievous in our affairs, have the finest intentions and cultivate them, but I do not know why you let them. But it might be so.
Because every form of life is justified in its existence and can think and act according to its own forms at its own discretion. We must not exert violent influences, if this is not vital, so we can only act on the path of instruction and emergency attacks, as determined by the directives.
So I start from the assumption that certain forms of life which are strange to you are trying to wander around from the vastness of the universe on our Earth and in the space of the world, and to influence other forms of life in various forms. On the other hand, I also suspect that one or more groups of descendants of your old race have not yet returned to you, and that they are still living according to the forms of a deity. Since they still have to live according to the old forms, it can practically only be that they influence many life forms, and also the Earth humans according to this, and appear as emissaries of a god.
With your speculations, you are very right, because there are other forms of life in the earthly space than just ours. There are also still some splinter groups of our own former races here, but also on other worlds, where they still live according to their old forms. They constantly try to influence the life forms, especially the Earth humans, according to their forms. Already the ancestors had appeared as gods, and they still do. They are anxious not to release the Earth humans in particular from this form, and to continue to make them dependent on themselves through Stoic references to religious heresies, etc., and to cast them under their spell. For a long time, they have been trying again to break into your world in order to subdue humanity on the Earth.
Contact Report 28.
Even if we ourselves have not yet reached perfection and are forced to make mistakes, we have nevertheless evolved to such an extent that we are superior to the human beings of the Earth in many forms. That is why we only adopt determinations that are anchored and justified in absolute logic. So when we enact determinations, we know very well what we are doing and what purposes they serve. We only enact determinations where they are necessary and should be followed. In all technological stages of development, we are 3,500 years ahead of the Earth human, according to earthly time calculation, while the development of consciousness has progressed about 25 million years further, which should be taken into account by all. Therefore, if an Earth human, who is behind us in this period of development, is of the opinion that his or her illogical ignorance exceeds our logical knowledge, then this corresponds to a selfish megalomania, as you like to call it. We too often make unrecognized mistakes. In no way do we try to exercise dictatorial measures or to impose our will or our knowledge on Earth humans. We have only taken on the self-imposed task of transmitting the teaching of the truth and some other things. Whoever wants to accept and acknowledge this teaching can do so according to his or her own decision, and whoever wants to reject it rejects it.
Contact Report 29.
At the present time, we are the most highly developed life forms that travel this Earth from outside your world and are also stationed here. Although there are other life forms that penetrate your Earth space, fly in, and partly also have their stations here, we correspond to the highest level of evolution of all. The second most developed form of life after us lies little more than 1,840 years of total evolution behind us. Of all present extraterrestrial life forms, which currently live in the earthly space, we are therefore a little more than 1,840 Earth years ahead in the total evolutionary standing. When we therefore communicate explanations and interpretations, then these correspond to the highest level of knowledge and wisdom, and the highest known truth, which must not first lead to truth in a confrontation through any explanations and interpretations of much more deeply developed life forms. What we therefore convey to you is the finally known truth up to and including our spiritual level.
Contact Report 30.
You will also have the opportunity to take a few pictures of star systems and galaxies, etc., and also to see from a distance the original homeland of the human races. Today, it offers a strange picture, whose origin is based on a violent destruction of a very large star. The destruction was triggered a very long time ago by a barbaric and power-hungry Iashwish, which ended in the destruction of himself. According to his senses and predictions, however, the destruction developed exactly in the form of the desired image, which was to serve the life forms of the universe as a memorial to his power. The predicted form was a gigantic image of an eye now looking through the universe as an evil memorial to human insanity and human greed for power, but otherwise millions in the entire universe, but of natural origin. True to its eye-like appearance, the structure has been named Ishwish Mate in connection with the producer since its creation. This name means, translated into your language, Eye of God, or God's Eye. According to your astronomical data and designations, you will find the Eye of God in the constellation of Lyra, and you name it the Ring Nebula, or M57. Note: additional comments about this are found in Contact Report 5187-95.